about coaching in the pandemic and some of the changes that we now have to contend with in the middle of COVID-19 as we try to resume track and field, a sport that we're all involved in. Just some guidelines before we proceed any further, so that in fact we have a smooth running of tonight's proceedings. First, we want to ask you to name yourself. So enter your name, your full name, so that we can properly identify who the individuals are in the meeting. Then we're going to ask you to keep your microphones muted so that there are no disruptions in the flow of the proceedings. When you get a chance to ask a question, you can unmute at that time. We also ask, if you are not dressed appropriately, to stop your video so that we are not distracted by any of the things that are going on in the background around you. And then, of course, in order to improve the performance of the system, we ask that you close all unwanted applications, unnecessary applications that might be running. And of course, if you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand, and certainly we'll be able to acknowledge you. And when you're acknowledged, then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. We thank you for joining us tonight. And at this time, I'm going to ask Miss Jodelyn Watson to open in prayer for us.
Good night, everyone.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
Doing your ministry on earth, you showed your power. Okay. Jesus, during your ministry on earth, you showed your power and caring by healing people of all ages, station of life, from physical, mental, spiritual ailments. Be present now to people who need your loving touch because COVID-19 made a of healing through diseases. Take away the from
Looks like Jody's having some problems there with her internet. So let's move on. First, I just want to share with you the agenda for those who are just joining us. The agenda, fairly straightforward. We're supposed to have online as well Dr. Carl Bruce, who is the chairman of the J3A's Medical Commission, and he is to share with us some general guidelines during COVID-19. Then also with us is Michael Vassell, a very decorated coach, and he's also the general secretary of the Jamaica Track and Field Coaches Association, and he will be sharing with us on the new normal, some of the competition changes based on things that the association had to do in getting the sport back up and running. And then we'll talk about some general changes, some things that we'll expect from coaches as we navigate this new time, and certainly get the opportunity for our athletes to compete. I notice we have quite a few persons from around the region, and welcome Richie Mercado, who is the secretary of NACA Coaches Association. So we thank you for joining us. I know we have some of our colleagues from the 10 kids, I think, online as well. So it's good for us to share in this moment and definitely learn from each other and learn as to how we can best proceed during this pandemic. I'm not seeing Dr. Carl Bruce quite yet. So let me just go ahead and welcome everyone. There are managers online, there are coaches online, and all persons who are interested in really understanding how we ought to function during this pandemic. And that's a great place to start. I know we're all anxious to get the sport up and running, and there've been quite a bit of things that have to be done in the background. I mean, I am aware because of some of the committees that I sit on, and I know the work that's taking place to just try and get things to move. And we're well advanced based on the pronouncements of the Prime Minister and other government officials. We seem to be just about to turn a corner in terms of getting the sport back up and running, a sport that we've done so well at, and we continue, or we'd like to see that continue for a while. But as you would expect, there's quite a bit of changes. You've seen the order of events for the high school championships, boys and girls champs. That has been circulated, and there's been quite a bit of changes there. So the expectation is that there would be changes. The extent of the changes, that's what we're here to talk about, some of those changes, not just to the competition, but some of the rules related to the competition and the format of the competition in the context of COVID-19. A major thing, it has to do with the restriction on the number of persons that can actually be at the venue. And so because of those restrictions, we certainly have to make some changes to make sure that as many persons get an opportunity to compete. Normally, we see competitions at a development meet with 1,500, 2,000 athletes. The reality is that's not going to happen in the midst of the pandemic. The numbers are going to be significantly lower, so there's quite a bit of expectation, things that you need to also share with your athletes, because if your athletes only want to compete in front of a lot of persons and they get a vibe from the crowd, there won't be any crowds. What we know is that for the month of February, the government has required that no spectators be allowed at any sporting event. So we'll talk a bit about what spectators are, but certainly they will have to learn to compete in front of just maybe their teammates. So that's part of the change that needs to take place. I'm not seeing Dr. Bruce, so I know Mr. Vassell is on. So at this time, let's just turn over to Mr. Vassell and allow him to do his part of the presentation. Welcome, Mr. Vassell.
Hi, good night. As David said, I think one of the things we all need to start looking at is what we are going to call the new normal. It's going to be weird. It's as I said, no spectators. I was speaking to a colleague of mine in the United States, and he said he was at a meet last weekend, and the silence was eerie because they were all there, and it was like you could have heard a pin drop. People were actually afraid to speak. So that is kind of where we're getting to. That's kind of what we're going to have to start getting used to know that, okay, this is how it's going to be. And it will be for us to talk to our athletes and them understand that, I mean, you just have to get used to doing things a little bit differently. You have to start getting a little bit more internal when it comes to you being motivated, when it comes to you, I mean, knowing what to do. And I guess us as coaches and managers will also have to understand that, because we have gotten to go ahead to have events in February, but it also comes with these restrictions, a lot of these restrictions which we will now have to adhere to. And it's going to be key that coaches and managers ensure that athletes adhere to these, because if not, we are going to find ourselves out in the cold. I mean, there are so much other sports out there, and I know at the end of the day, you will hear that track and field is getting preference, but I think we were a bit more proactive. We went out there, we got protocols put out, We begged for the meetings and we are now here, and let us see what is going to happen. So we all understand that what COVID-19 is and the impact it's having on sport. And so let us all see some of the things that we will have to do to ensure that we can have a season here in Jamaica. Now, one of the first things I put up here is this big warning. Failure to comply with the protocols will result in sanctions being applied to the meet organizers and the athletes' aides. Now, athlete aides in this instance is as defined by the IAAF, which means coaches and masseuses and team managers. So it means that if we do not ensure that the athletes do what they need to do and any sanction will be applied, it means that you as a coach will also be held responsible. And I know that's something that some people say it's not fair, but it is what it is, and we will all have to learn to work with it. Okay? Now, general safety guidelines. Some general safety things which we need to understand that each team needs to understand that you must have a list of all persons, including proper name, telephone number, that will need to be presented at the entrance. You will not be required to hand it over, but in the case that anything happens, it will be needed for contact tracing. So we need to remember that. So this is some that may be some new, what is it, new administrative stuff that we don't really think we need to do, but that's something we have to do. So it itemized list, and I mean, we all should have a list of all the athletes on our team. Tents, each team must have a tent sufficient to the size of the number of athletes entered in order to maintain a controlled space. Now, when I think the Ministry of Health guidelines, when they were just coming out, I think they said something like, if I remember correctly, that 3 persons to a 10 by 10 tent. Now, I think everybody here knows that that really and truly would not work and would not make any sense. So I think one of the things that we're looking at is the fact that we're going to say, listen, we are going to be using the tents as a control space for each team. So each team, this tent will be your control space. You will have to understand that as much as possible, social distancing will be applied or will be practiced, but it will definitely not be the ideal situation. I know that we will still get some flack from the ministry about this because I know not everybody will be happy. Just give me a minute, let me just switch to the PowerPoint because I think this will be better. Hold on. Okay, good. All right, so we are at the protocols. Good. So COVID-19 protocols will be enforced at all times. All teams are required to have a COVID-19 marshal, which is a new position, and that marshal is going to be designated and clearly identified, which means having a name tag or a armband. I think an armband might be useful that we will have to look at. This person is responsible for enforcing all required protocols as outlined in the meet information, which all teams will get. That is a document that also is being prepared. So you'll have the meet information along with the protocols regarding teams. Now, this individual should be one of the trained individuals that were trained prior to the event. So we need to understand that all teams, it is in your best interest to ensure that you get at least one of your parent, your managers need to be trained by the ministry so that we know that they're certified. And at the end of the day, it will make life a lot easier. Okay, where are we now? We are, sorry, is everybody seeing the screen?
Yes, there's something blocking the bottom part of your screen now.
I don't know. I'm not used to this thing. Please move this window away from the shared applications. Help me. Are we back? Good. This thing is in my way. All right. I think I'm back now. All right, should be. Good. Right. Competition protocols. I hope everybody got the first one. Competition protocols. Coaches, athletes, and officials should ensure that they maintain social distancing appropriate for each event. As much as possible, we try to maintain the social distancing guidelines of 6 feet. So it is going to be easier for some competitors in some events, but as much as possible, especially when the event is not happening, you're talking like during the call room, on your way to the event, leaving the competition, all of these things, we need to try and practice as much as possible, because I know we will be closely watched, and we need to ensure that we adhere to these things. Some general stuff for teams, for your team and other athletes' safety, we're asking that the hands of the competitors should be sanitized before re-entering the tent. I mean, they would have been sanitized when they left the competition area, but we are trying to be as safe as possible. So this is where, okay. All right, something happened. David, you took over the screen? Okay, all right.
We're actually not seeing your screen. So.
All right, so all right, next slide then. We're at the second slide. Since you control, right? Okay. So athletes should wear their mask at all times in the call room while being escorted to the competition site. They should have a mask on them at all times. Social distancing must be maintained while being escorted. Mask can be removed only when they are ready to compete. Okay? And athletes must be reminded, no hugging, no touching of persons in the competition area. And I mean, as much as we try, these things will happen. So this is something we'll have to get our athletes used to. Next slide, please. Okay, general event protocols. Athletes and officials follow hygiene guidelines. Each event will have some general guidelines. Most events should have a wash station or a sanitization station before entering the area. There are some events which will require more sanitization than others, but please, we're asking that all athletes must follow these rules. If the athlete doesn't follow the rule, they're liable to be evicted from the space, and that will mean they'll take no further part in the competition, and it will also put the competition, the officials, and everybody else at risk. So we need to ensure that our athletes understand that it is not their job to be arguing with officials when they hear that they're supposed to be sanitizing, and what they just sanitized 2 minutes ago, let's just try and get them to comply. All right? We're back on the social distancing. It is something that we'll always speak about, because I think based on how the ministry is, I think that is one of the things that they are always worried about the social distancing not being maintained. So as much as possible, we need to ensure that our athletes do that. I mean, if it only means that giving yourself enough space that you can swing your arms all around, you create that space. There are some things that you can do. Athletes out there for jumping events. I mean, the easiest thing to do is get a large umbrella. Maybe that could help create a space. Athletes must immediately return to their tent after completing the event, and avoid intermingling. I think one of the competition's rules might say that athletes leave the competition area or the venue after competing. And I know for some of us, especially those who travel, it will be a problem. So let us try and say at least return to the tent in a controlled space, and we will try to manage that space. That is the job of the team manager and your COVID marshal. Okay, next slide. Good. Okay, event-specific protocols. the events will be covered in the team manual and the meet organizers manual. So all of this information will be there, but just some things that I just think we need to remember. Event specific for your throwing events. All implements will be weighed and certified. Athletes are allowed to use their personal implements, but these must be weighed and checked in prior to the start. And they need to remember that this implement is now available to be used by other competitors, providing it is sanitized, and the sanitization is a part of the protocols that the officials need to practice. Athletes must only touch the implement that they intend to use. There are some athletes that they are there and they're picking and choosing, and at the end of the day, they touch six implements. We need to discourage that kind of habit, because if they every implement that they touch will now need to be re-sanitized. So these are just some things. Athletes are not allowed to share chalk. We need to minimize that. So it's for team officials to try and just keep that going. So that's basically all I have to say. This is just really some guidelines which I wanted to touch on so that everybody can remember. It's something that we have to reiterate again and again and again so that we can all get track and field started. Do we take questions now, David?
Yes, you can take a few questions on this particular presentation. Please raise your hand, or if you would like to ask a question, we'll go ahead and allow you to unmute your mic and ask a question. You can raise your virtual hand or type the question in the chat. Any questions?
Yes, hello, good evening. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
All right, good. Well, by way of introduction, my name is Khalil Kato. I'm from listening from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I was just curious. I was listening to the protocols that Mr. Vassal was going through as it relates to the hosting of the meet, and I was wondering how, or if it does it apply to primary schools? Now, I know that CHAMS is a secondary school meet. I was wondering if any of this would have applied to primary schools, or you're only looking at the secondary schools.
David, you want to take that?
Well, the protocol is actually applied to all competition, regardless of what the age is. But right now, I don't think the primary school students are in training or allowed to do extracurricular activity. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with respect to that group, because they're not even attending school face-to-face. The face-to-face school
Right.
is only for the upper school, which is really grades 11, 12, and 13. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with respect to that group that you mentioned.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Any other questions for Mr. Vassal? All right, well.
Must have been a good presentation.
You always do a good job. All right, Mr. Vassal had actually mentioned that the details are found in the team manual, and the team manual will be made available to all the teams, the managers and coaches, I think within a few hours. That will be made available to them, and that has all the details that you need to be more than just aware that they exist. You need to be aware, very familiar with the content of the document, because you will be held responsible for not just your own action, but the action of the entire team. And at some point after receiving this document, you're going to have a session with your athletes and give them some real information as to what is expected of them during this pandemic and the competitions that will be staged during the pandemic. So we're not going to go through all the things that are in the document, because you will get it, you will read it, and certainly we'll be providing opportunities for you to interact and ask questions so that you can understand the content of it. But definitely want to say to coaches and managers, make sure you read this document. It's not very long, but it outlines the protocols that govern the sport during COVID and what is expected of each of you. I see Ms. Norton, her hand is raised. I don't know if if she has a question for Mr. Vassell. Go ahead with your question.
Well, firstly, the team manual, has it been distributed as yet? Or that's an upgrade to what the protocols that have been sending out?
No, there are two different documents. There are several different documents. The answer to your question is no, it hasn't been distributed yet. This is the team manual, which is separate from the meet organizers manual, which was distributed before. So this manual is specifically tailored to teams and outline the protocols or the things that affect the teams.
Okay.
And the language is a little different. So this is for the teams, and this will be circulated within a few hours, as I mentioned.
All right, back to Vassell's presentation. Again, similar to what was presented to them previously in terms of the protocols. I noticed he sort of skipped around the tent issue, because here are students coming on a bus, which is my concern. 20, 30 students coming on a bus to the venues, and then you're going to ask them to have social distance in the tent. So I know you're trying to tweak it, but what sort of guidelines are you going to now put in place for the tent, for teams in the tent? Are you not, I'm sure you can't stick to the strict guidelines of social distancing.
Well, unfortunately, we're gonna have to stick to the guidelines in terms of the people under the tent. But there is quite a bit of flexibility and creativity that teams could actually employ in order to remain compliant but still be present. And I'm gonna go, if you allow me to, just share a few slides, and then hopefully I would answer some of those questions, and then you'll understand how you could actually navigate within the rules that are there. So allow me to just share a few slides with you, and then maybe your question might be answered. All right, so there are some general changes. Mr. Vassell mentioned some of the changes, but there are going to be some things that take place at the entry point. The entry point is going to be a different setup from what usually happens. So in some cases, teams that travel together, you come on the bus and you all offload off the bus, so you go in together as a group, one by one, you present your accreditation, you get in. Or you have a situation where individual athletes have their own transportation and they meet at the venue and they come in and they walk in and so on. Regardless of how the team assembles before they enter the competition venue, there are going to be some changes that must take place in terms of your own team operation, because what's going to happen is that no person on that team is going to be admitted in the competition venue without all persons on the team being screened before, temperature screened. So what's going to happen is that every person is going to be screened for elevated temperature. And if any member of that team is found with an elevated temperature, then the entire team is denied entry. It won't be just the individual, but it will be the entire team. So what that means is that the temperature check-in needs to take place wherever you meet before you leave for the venue. So if you're leaving from Oracobessa, before you board the bus, you need to check every single person's temperature, and anybody who has an elevated temperature, you need to send them back home. If you allow that person to come on the bus and go to the venue, the entire team is going to be turned back. If you have persons coming on their own and they meet you at the venue, and one of those persons have an elevated temperature, even though they didn't travel with the team, they don't care, everybody's going to be sent back. So what you do is that when you get to the venue, whoever you get there, persons come in their own transportation, then you screen them before they join the rest of the team, so that you are not denied entry because of an individual having symptoms that are flu-like or COVID symptoms. So that is important. So the entry requirements are different. The entire team is going to be screened before any member of the team is allowed in, and therefore you need to arrive early. Arrive early, be prepared to wait a little longer than usual. So no need to get anxious or complain. The staff will try and do their best to process all the persons as quickly as possible. Social distance must be maintained at the entrance. Well, so even though you're coming together as a group, you still need to maintain social distance, particularly because the concern that the health officials have is that you don't know at what point an individual became infected. And that's one of the things that they want to try and make sure the social distancing is strictly maintained. So in track and field terms, we know how it is. You know, you start a race and you're running well, and then you just kind of jog through the line. You don't finish as strong. And coaches, you always tell an athlete, finish strong, run through the tape, run through the line, run through the line. It's the same thing. We don't want a situation where we start off very well in terms of observing the protocols in the morning, and as the day goes longer and so on, people stop wearing their mask and they stop social distance. That's not going to happen. We don't want that to happen because you're supposed to run through the line. So that's very important. Now, all the competitions are going to have restricted number of athletes that will be allowed. And in fact, the numbers are so much lower than what we're accustomed to. I mean, the conversation really has been about a max of 300 athletes at a competition. I mean, 300 sounds like 3 teams put together. So it sounds more like a triangular meet rather than a competition that we're used to on any particular Saturday. And because of the small number of athletes that will be allowed to be at the competition, we're saying to coaches, some of the practices that we've had in the past, you bring an athlete to the meet, they run the 100 and the 200, that's their specialty. They bring them to run a 400 just like blowout or whatever it is. We're saying during this time, we don't want any training runs at the meets. Keep those within your training environment. Athletes who you enter for particular events, it should be the event that you want to see them compete in. Minimize the number of athletes that you enter in the meet. Just eliminate some of those things that would be normally done. You have an athlete run a 400 and then 10 minutes later they come back and run a 200. Have them run and do max runs. That's it for the day, and so on. Those are things that we're going to ask coaches to do, because the opportunities must be taken seriously, and we want to preserve it for everyone, right? That's very important for us to understand. The second thing is that we're suggesting to coaches to have more focused goals and objectives rather than just showing up at a meet and you bring everybody because it was easier to just enter everybody in the meet rather than try and decide whether John is going to run and Mir is going to run and whatever Kimani going to run. You just kind of enter everybody. It would be good if during this time we have more focused goals and objectives, the things that we want to accomplish for the particular athlete, rather than just make a meet happen or just show up at a competition without any specific goals or objectives. We know we're also operating in a period where the qualification rules for the boys and girls champs has changed, where they're going the route of a national ranking system, which they're taking the top 32 for the event, and possibly, well, not possibly, but the first 2 finishers in the regional competition, regional championships, get an automatic spot. So this idea of running a lot of persons in various events, that will need to curtail. We want you to take smaller squads to the meet. The athlete who is very developmental and possibly will require more than just this season for them to reach their full potential. We're saying to you to provide some other opportunities within the training environment to have that athlete, go through their paces and not necessarily bring every single person to the competition. Register only those athletes who you know will compete, because if you enter, anybody you enter, you'll have to pay an entry fee for the individual, because the entry fees will be per athlete. It's not team-based entries as you would have been accustomed to. So you enter 50 athletes, you're going to pay for each of them. And so whether the athlete shows up or not, you're still going to have to pay the entry fee for that individual. And those are non-refundable. So register all of those athletes that you know will compete. Be a bit more prepared for the competition. We're saying to coaches, don't just show up. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the rules of the competition. Those rules are going to be circulated within a couple of days because they're all new. Familiarize yourself with the rules. Make a copy of it. Keep it on your phone or walk around with it so that you are aware of what the rules are for the competition. And I'm not saying much in terms of what the competitions are going to be like, but they're certainly not going to be like what you're accustomed to. Make the changes before the deadline. So whenever the changes are due, make sure you make those changes, submit them on time. If you made a change or you forgot to make a change, and the athlete comes here and says, sir, miss, coach, I really want to run this week, and you say, well, all right, let me try and squeeze in. And then you show up Saturday morning trying to enter a new athlete. Those things are not going to happen because the entries are going to close on Mondays of the week. The performance lists for each team are going to be created and distributed back to each team by Wednesday. You have 24 hours to go through that list and make your changes and declare whether the athlete is going to report or not. That should be submitted on Thursday. By Friday, the heats are going to be pre-drawn and distributed back to the teams that are involved. And on Saturday, everybody shows up to go in their heats. So on Saturday, there will be no changes that are going to be allowed. So you have to tell yourself, no, tell the athlete, no, it's not going to happen. Don't try and make changes after the deadline for changes. Those are some of the things that we need to change. Be comfortable, being without paper. You're not going to get printed results because almost everything is going to be paperless. The entries are going to be online. Results are online. Most of the events will have live results. So you make sure you have enough data on your phone so that you can access the cheat sheet, access the results, and just being comfortable without paper. A lot of people like paper, roll it up in your hand, look like a baton because you're a coach, and you stick it in your pocket and you pull it out and you look at it. Be comfortable without paper because the environment is going to be almost paperless. I don't think they're going to be posting any results, printed results. You're going to have to access it on your phone. So just make sure you're prepared for that particular reality. We're also suggesting video record your athletes in competition. I don't know if you want to, have somebody specific to do that or you do it yourself, but use the opportunity as well to focus on doing the video recording rather than doing the coaching. I say that because I know I can't multitask in that way. If I try to watch the event and try and video, when I look back at the video, the camera is up in the sky and I don't see the athlete. So what I have to do, maybe I'm the only person disabled like that. What I have to do is to just focus on capturing the video. I have no comment for the athlete until I look back at the video. I don't know if I'm the only person, but just record the thing, and then afterwards you could, review it with the athlete and that kind of thing. So that's is something that you may have to plan for. I'm not suggesting that you have to go buy a new bling bling phone or anything like that, but make sure you prepare yourself for that particular reality or that opportunity. Be concerned for others and the bigger picture. I know sometimes we tend to be so competitive, but not everything is a competition. Not every aspect of it we need to be competing against each other for. And you know, defend the equal opportunity for all kind of thing. You know, maybe it's the last heat and you've had 5 athletes who've already competed and there's this one person who doesn't have, you know, haven't done anything. Maybe, you know, defend the equal opportunity for all persons. That's something that I think we ought to do during this time. Corona has really just showed up how selfish people really are. But it requires for us to really work together and collaborate a lot more. Winning is not all, it is important, but there are lots of lessons to be learned, lots of lessons to be taught other than winning, seeing that most of us lose anyway. There's only one person getting the medal, the rest of us have to really do otherwise. But you know, you can still celebrate without winning, of course. Celebrate other athletes' success. This is a great time for coaches to be a fan of the sport as well. Sometimes we don't realize that we ought to enjoy the performances of other athletes and see their development and follow them and really engage ourselves in the sport as a fan and not be so you know, just coach, and everything you analyze and everything you overanalyze, but just being a fan. This is an opportunity for us to be a fan of the sport that we're involved in and of the sport that we love. We also want for coaches to assist with the process during this time. The opportunity to compete is not unique to the individual or just to you or just to myself. We actually are part of a bigger network, and it is the opportunity only comes because there are many other persons who are interested and who need to compete. So just you and I, you know, that they were considering whether to open up, they probably wouldn't. But because there are so many persons, so the opportunity comes because of the high level of participation. So we need for you to assist with the process. Make sure you enter the correct details for your athletes online at registration. This helps with the data. There's been quite a bit of problem. I know, as you know, as a meet promoter myself, I see cases where an entire team is entered and not one athlete date of birth is there. Every single person just name entered, and it presents such great stress for the meet organizer to put them in events and put them in the correct class, or you know, we're saying all the details for the athlete must be entered at the point of registration. The first instance will be interpreted as an error. So we're gonna say, okay, well, you know, you made a mistake, so all right, fine. The second instance of these entry shortfalls will be not taken the same way. In fact, it's more likely that the athlete or the team is going to be barred if there is repeat instances of incomplete or incorrect data being submitted for the athlete. We especially in the context of the rankings that we are looking forward to, the data is so important, and the data integrity at the point of entry is part of the problem that makes it a little bit more difficult. So bear in mind, you will be required to enter the correct details. Do what you can to keep all things compliant. Play your part. If the team across the way is not compliant and the health officials say, well, you know, they weren't compliant, they're going to shut down the entire meet. So your team, even though you're compliant, your team may actually not get a chance to compete because there are other persons. So every single person needs to understand the personal responsibility that they have to remain compliant and do what they can to keep things compliant. Somebody passing you, an athlete passing from another team not wearing their mask, it's okay. You can tell them to put on their mask. Put on a mask. Keep the environment such that there is this constant reminder that we all need to be compliant. Obey the final calls. I've been in a lot of the meetings, planning some of these meets, and I can tell you that the intention is for the final call to be the final call. If you miss the final call because of the fact that the heats are going to be pre-drawn and they're trying to be contactless. In fact, some of the bigger meets will not even have a call room. They have a call area where you come up, they call you, you come up to the area, they read out the names, and you just go straight through and go to the competition, not even interacting with you. So when if you go to a meet where they're not using a call room, but they're sending through athletes in the particular event, when all those athletes go through, they're not going to allow anybody in. So you more than likely will miss your event. So it's very important that you operate on time, you're paying attention to the calls, you're obeying the calls. So when you're final call, you don't just take off the spikes, the last start practice, and you take off the spikes and take your own time and walk back. No, you're probably going to miss the race. Make sure the athletes have the correct gear, the correct implements. That will help with the process as well. No spectators, that means don't bring your child who's not competing. An athlete who's not competing is actually a spectator. So they might be on a track team, but they're not competing today. Don't bring them. Let them stay home, watch it online, do a Facebook Live or something, so that everybody who can watch it from your perspective. So those are the things that we want to bring out to you, and we'll take some questions. I don't know if anybody have any, but let's hear some questions based on what I just mentioned to you. Please raise your hand or open your mic.
Mr. Riley. Hello.
You're muted.
Go ahead. We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for the teams that are coming from the rural areas. You see, what time is the meets scheduled to end so that these teams can reach back to their areas where they live in time for the curfew, so to speak? You have an idea?
All right. I thought I had it in one of my slides, but apparently not. But can I tell you, some of the meets will actually have two sessions. A morning session, which will run from 8:30 to 12 o'clock, and an afternoon session, which runs from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Predominantly, the morning session will be for girls only. And it means that the boys will not be allowed in the venue during the morning. And then at the end of the morning session, the girls will have to vacate the venue. And then there's an hour and a half for the staff to sanitize the facility. And then the boys come in and do from the 2 to 5, I think it is 2 to So that actually will be something that teams will have to contemplate. Well, co-ed teams will have to contemplate as to what logistical arrangements they would need to implement in order to function in that space. I mean, 1 week you might take just the boys, 1 week you might take just the girls. That's something that you may have to consider. So if it's the girls who compete in the morning, then the issue with the curfew would be more likely the early part of the morning in terms of getting to the competition, rather than at the end of the evening. But I think the curfews end at 5. So, you know, you'd have to plan for that. Any other question? Shane Cole, you have a question? All right, I see Marvin Johnson, your hand is raised. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Riley. You say the meat, all the meats will be paperless, but not all the time the results are correct. So what if your child actually runs a good time, even the fastest time, and then when the result is posted, it is incorrect? How does that go? Because you'll be having a performance base that can help you towards champs. So how will that go?
All right, so that's why the results are live. So you should actually check before you leave, because the results would be posted. So as soon as the event, not necessarily the meet, but the event, at the end of the 100 meters, those results should be online. So you check that and then you make the corrections there rather than wait.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Mr. Philpott Brown, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, man. And I'm just asking pertaining, everybody has to come for it? Like the boys, you said boys were competing. Does it mean that all the boys have to come at the same time? Because for us, sometimes we have the 5,000 runner come first, and then we have the other runners, because they're depend on how their time schedule is, they tend to come when they are competing, which would reduce the number of people that you are saying must be at the meets. I'm just asking, is it that all the team must arrive at the same time?
The arrival of the team, that's something you're gonna have to work with, because in fact, nobody's going to be allowed in the venue without them being associated with the team. So it is a tricky situation. But I hear what you're asking about.
No, it's just that when we go, we would arrive there first before anybody comes. But what would happen now is that they periodically come because of how they run. The 5,000 runner would come first, then the high jump.
But in the context where you're not going to be spending the entire day at the facility, then maybe everybody should come together.
Okay. Yes, yeah. Because usually 5,000 runner, like if you want to go to JC, he competes at 9 o'clock. He's gone for the rest of the day. We don't see him anymore. He's gone.
I don't think they're going to keep a track of how many persons are in the venue. They're just going to admit the persons based on the entries, and then that's just it. They're not going to say, well, okay, somebody.
No, because you see, we want the runner to come, compete, and then leave. We don't want him to stay with us. That's how usually we operate in meets, and so our numbers are minimal right through the day. Because they come, they compete, they go.
So they still get the lunch?
Well, for now, we would say that sometimes, like the 5,000 runner never gets lunch because he competes by 9:30. He's gone. He doesn't have lunch.
But good evening again.
Ms. McNaughton, you have a question or you have a comment?
David, but the ideal situation would be to have the athletes come close to their time of competition and leave. Like in the case of the great management of champs teams, you don't bring the athletes all to the stadium, especially teams that are close to the stadium. You bring them just in time for their warm-up and for competition. And I thought in one protocols, that's the situation that is what you would, the preferred situation that you wanted.
I can't speak to that. I really can't speak to that because most teams actually don't operate like that when it comes to competition. So the protocols were established for the teams who would normally come together. Teams in the corporate area tend to have a different way of functioning, but those are the minority of the teams in the overall scheme of things. There are way more teams that travel together than teams that have individuals.
That's
come
true.
together.
That's true. But for the corporate
why-
area teams.
Yeah, that's
but
why the
that's why-
protocols are set up like that.
But isn't that why you're going to be having regional meets where that more teams will go to their regional meets rather than be traveling long trips? But for teams outside of the corporate area, I understand you can't be coming in stages or in
Right.
shifts.
Mhm.
I understand that. But isn't that also why, based on the meeting 2 nights ago, that hopefully that teams will more go to their regional meets and bring in big teams to Kingston or to certain locations?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. What I would caution though is that as we try to get things started, let us, as best as possible simplify it, see how it works, and then we look at the changes that would make it a lot more customized to the individual team or person. But you know, if you understand that submitting protocols to the government for approval, we have to present something that would be more across the board in terms of what would be applied. And so that is what we'd want to start with. And then we see what changes can be made to make it a little bit more, you know, easier for some persons to operate. Grace Borough, go ahead with your question.
It was a good night, everybody. It wasn't a question per se. I was just supporting my colleague, Mr. Phil Potts Brown. We generally operate that the athlete comes 2 to 3 hours before their event with just enough time to warm up, go to the marshalling area, compete, and they leave the venue immediately after competing. So we don't have a large group coming at any given time. And that's how we wish to continue, because it is safer when most of the teams are away from the teams that have to travel together and have to travel by a bus. Those of us who can be understanding should. But and that is how I plan to do all my teams.
That's why. All right, Grace, I hear you. And I mean, sorry, David, let me just I'll try and answer. Remember, what part of the proposal now is to have maybe like some 4-hour meets with one gender. So I think when we all understand the need to try and get the athletes like 2 hours before their event, but the meet is gonna last all of 4 hours. So if we can just try our best and I mean and get it going. Remember, as I said, these are not normal times. These are abnormal times, and we have to just try and do the best we can to ensure that this thing happens.
I agree, and I have no problem with that. Why a child who's going to compete at 11 o'clock need to come at 8 o'clock?
Because
That
they
you're
have to leave
endangering
by
that
12.
child.
Because they have to leave by 12. If you're there in the morning, the morning session ends at 12.
Fine, I have no problem with that.
Right. So that's the situation. I think when the rules are released, teams will get a better idea as to how they can operate within these rules, and what would be the best situation for that particular team. So bear that in mind. Yeah? Any other question?
Yes, Sir Riley. Good evening, everyone.
So Peterkin, go ahead.
Yeah, man. I have a concern. Is the amount of schools that are co-eds? Is it a small number as it relates to the schools that are of a singular sex team?
No, most of the teams are co-ed.
Yes. So here goes my question. I'm wondering, as it relates to the morning versus the afternoon, based on the fact that most schools travel on one bus, I'm thinking, because your numbers are probably not that massive. So taking a team, say, from the country and coming up, having a session at 8 to 11 and then from 2 to 5, it will be just one transportation.
Well, really not, because the recommendation from the Ministry of Health is that a normal coaster of 28 shouldn't have more than 15 athletes traveling to the meet.
Most definitely. And based even on the corona
so you would end
situation.
up with 2 buses anyway.
No, I'm just saying, based on the situation, your teams are not as huge. Probably you have, say, 15 athletes per se.
Okay.
And divided into the two sections.
Well, here what happened, and I know it's being recorded, but nobody's stopping you to bring the 15 athletes to the venue. It's just that maybe the boys will have to sit in the bus outside while the girls alone go in.
Okay,
the girls come out and then they stay in the bus and the bus leaves at the end of the meet. But they're not going to let the other gender inside the facility, because that's the only way you're going to be able to control the number of persons that are there. So for example, if the limit is 300 persons in the venue, if we were to say that includes male and female, you'd realize that less persons would get a chance to compete.
Definitely.
That is why it has been proposed for the sessions where you'd end up with 300 girls competing in the morning and 300 boys in the afternoon, rather than 300 both for the entire day, if we were to do one session all day. You understand?
Yeah, man, definitely.
Right. So it's the best way to function within the context of the reality that we face. Christopher Mitchell has a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Would we be told beforehand which gender is going to perform either in the morning or in the afternoon? Because it would make it better for us to plan on when to leave out or when not to leave out, so to speak, to come to the meets.
Yeah.
So for example, Cornwall is a boys' school. If it's going to be in the afternoon, we wouldn't have to leave out at 5 o'clock in the morning.
There you go.
So we'll have to make.
I think the information will be released within a few days. I think maybe on Friday afternoon, it should hit everybody's inbox, because they will be finalized and ratified on Friday. This is a developing situation. You'd expect that it's so much has happened within the last 2 weeks to bring us to this point. It's a lot of meetings, a lot of work behind the scenes, and we're literally at the brink of getting some opportunities for competition. So that's what we're looking for. So hopefully, no later than Friday, everybody should have that information, which is tomorrow, actually. Yeah, tomorrow. Any other question? I think I answered Dwayne Johnson's question. The rules should be available tomorrow, as well as the team manual will go out tomorrow as well. All right. I don't see Dr. Bruce. So if there aren't any other questions, then we'll just thank you all for joining. We hope the session was useful and
Mr. Riley,
yes.
is there a specific reason why the girls are in the mornings and the boys are in the afternoon?
No, I guess it's a coin flipping situation, which is why it might actually not be the case for every single meet.
Okay.
But for now, that is what was on the table. Persons have concern about the girls getting home early and that kind of thing. So that's the issue.
Okay.
All right. No other questions. Thank you all for joining. And feel free to go to the website, jatafka.org, get some details there, and stay tuned for the information released tomorrow. All right. Have a good day and see you soon.